Let's pick things up there with tonight's Government Insider. Joining me, Francis Rose, federal government expert, radio host, and publisher of francisrose.com. All right, Francis, tell us more about this package of proposals aimed at curbing gun violence. What's in there?
We don't know exactly what all is in there yet. President Obama met today with Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, and the theme of discussion was supposed to be what exactly is President Obama able to do through executive order and what requires legislative remedy, that is action from Congress, to be able to do about guns. What the president has indicated in the past he would like to do is he would like to make it more difficult for people who do transactions, what are called casual or informal transactions, to get documentation for those transactions on the books. That would then require the background checks to be conducted for each of those transactions. The rule in law now is that if a person conducts fewer than 50 transactions of guns per year, that that person does not have to get a gun dealer's license and therefore does not have to conduct background checks. We understand that's one of the things that President Obama would like to try to remedy through the executive order, but it's not clear if he'll be able to or not.
As you know, a major gun show just wrapped up in Virginia this past weekend. Business was through the roof. Now, on the left, presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders cheered this executive order. On the right, a promise to overturn it. Now, let's talk about the latter. Are executive orders easily overturned?
Well, they are and they aren't. The history here indicates that if the next president chooses to overturn the executive order of the last president, that is easy to do. That depends on, you mentioned Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders being in favor of this. That depends then on one of them becoming elected president. If a Republican presidential candidate that's opposed to this executive order becomes president next January, it would be easy for him or her to repeal this executive order simply by writing another executive order saying, I repeal the last one. The congressional aspect of this is more difficult because what it requires is a law that specifically repeals the provisions of the executive order. That would be a law that would go through the standard legislative channels, meaning one chamber, the House or Senate, would have to write a bill, or members of either chamber would write a bill. They would have to be passed through the chamber. They'd have to be reconciled and sent to the president. As long as President Obama is the President of the United States, it's doubtful that he'd sign a law that would repeal his own executive order. So a congressional repeal of an executive order at this point in time is seems like a pretty big long shot, Morris.
And he's going to protect his namesake health care program. Let's talk about Obamacare. The House will reconvene later this week. Their first order of business will be a measure repealing the health care law. This after dozens of failed repeal votes in the House and Senate. Francis, am I missing something here? House Speaker Paul Ryan promised a bold new agenda. This seems like more of the same.
Well, for the members of his caucus and for the people who voted them into office, this is a new agenda. What Republican activists, not just at the rank and file citizen level, but in Washington have been saying for a long time that they didn't understand about John Boehner's speakership was, why doesn't the House, which with a majority of Republicans and now a fairly large majority of Republicans, pass laws that speak to what they want the agenda for the United States to be? If President Obama vetoes them, so be it, and then the presidential campaign in 2016 can be about very clear visions for what the Republican Party's for and what the Democratic Party is for moving forward. So that's what you're about to see, I think, is a series of laws here that members of the Republican caucus in the House know won't become law because President Obama will veto them, but they'll be able to go back to their electorates during the fall elections and say, this is what we're for and this is what we're committed to because we were willing to try to pass this into law.
All right. Before you go, give us an update on a pair of VA employees. The Justice Department will not pursue criminal charges against Diana Rubens and Kimberly Graves.
Yes.
Why not?
They've decided that after seeing the referral from the Inspector General at the Department of Veterans Affairs, that the conduct that the two women engaged in, while everybody seems to agree it was pretty egregious and that it wasn't appropriate, the Justice Department believes that they didn't do anything illegal, and so it's not possible to prosecute them for the bonuses that they received and for the way that they moved employees around in jobs inside the VA so they could take those jobs. I haven't found anybody in Washington that thinks that what Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves did was a good idea or was particularly ethical. But if it's not contrary to laws of the United States and policies of the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Justice Department says we can't pursue them, and that appears to be where this case stands right now, Morris.
You know, you're so right. It all boils down to lawyering, and if it's not written in the books, if it's not illegal, there's not much you can do.
I would not be surprised to see action in either the House Veterans Affairs Committee, though, Morris, Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, or maybe both, very quickly as the new Congress gets back to work.
I hope so. There's been an ongoing debate about VA reform. Senior executives say their right to due process is under attack. Some lawmakers want to make it easier to fire poor performers. What do you think is going to happen in 2016?
Well, I think that will be folded into what we're seeing about the cases with Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves, because neither one of them has been fired. And the House Veterans Affairs Committee Chairman, Jeff Miller, has said on a number of occasions, these women should be fired. There are others in the VA that should be fired. And the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Bob McDonald, the Deputy Secretary, Sloan Gibson, have not been able to do that. And his charge has been to give them the tools legislatively that they need to be able to get rid of these people, and that's where what you're talking about due process, comes in. Due process still exists under the legislation that President Obama signed last year. It is a lot shorter than it used to be, and there are some people who say that it's not fair due process. It does exist, and the fear among federal employee groups, Morris, is that what applies now at VA to just senior executives will not only apply to more of VA, as one bill already would do, but will start to apply to employees all over the federal government, as members of Congress say, well, if it's good for one agency, it should be good for all of them.
Yep, we've covered a lot of topics. Francis Rose, federal government expert. Thanks again, Francis.
Thank you for having me, Morris.